Chapter 18. Pinocchio finds the fox and the cat again, and goes with them to sow the gold pieces in the field of wonders. Crying as if his heart would break, the Marionette mourned for hours over the length of his nose. No matter how he tried, it would not go through the door. The fairy showed no pity toward him, as she was trying to teach him a good lesson, so that he would stop telling lies, the worst habit any boy may acquire. But when she saw him, pale with fright and with his eyes half out of his head from terror, she began to feel sorry for him, and clapped her hands together. 1,000 woodpeckers flew in through the window and settled themselves on Pinocchio's nose. They pecked and pecked so hard at that enormous nose that in a few moments it was the same size as before. "How good you are, my fairy," said Pinocchio, drying his eyes, "and how much I love you." "I love you too," answered the fairy, "and if you wish to stay with me, you may be my little brother, and I'll be your good little sister." "I should like to stay, but what about my poor father?" "I have thought of everything. Your father has been sent for, and before night he will be here." "Really?" cried Pinocchio joyfully. "Then, my good fairy, if you are willing, I should like to go to meet him. I cannot wait to kiss that dear old man, who has suffered so much for my sake." "Surely. Go ahead, but be careful not to lose your way. Take the wood path, and you'll surely meet him." Pinocchio set out, and as soon as he found himself in the wood, he ran like a hare. When he reached the giant oak tree, he stopped, for he thought he heard a rustle in the brush. He was right. There stood the fox and the cat, the 2 traveling companions with whom he had eaten at the Inn of the Red Lobster. "Here comes our dear Pinocchio!" cried the fox, hugging and kissing him. "How did you happen here?" "How did you happen here?" repeated the cat. "It is a long story," said the Marionette. "Let me tell it to you. The other night, when you left me alone at the inn, I met the assassins on the road." "The assassins? Oh, my poor friend! And what did they want?" "They wanted my gold pieces." "Rascals!" said the fox. "The worst sort of rascals," added the cat. "But I began to run," continued the Marionette, "and they after me, until they overtook me and hanged me to the limb of that oak." Pinocchio pointed to the giant oak near by. "Could anything be worse?" said the fox. "What an awful world to live in! Where shall we find a safe place for gentlemen like ourselves?" As the fox talked thus, Pinocchio noticed that the cat carried his right paw in a sling. "What happened to your paw?" he asked. The cat tried to answer, but he became so terribly twisted in his speech that the fox had to help him out. "My friend is too modest to answer. I'll answer for him. About an hour ago we met an old wolf on the road. He was half starved, and begged for help. Having nothing to give him, what do you think my friend did out of the kindness of his heart? With his teeth he bit off the paw of his front foot, and threw it at that poor beast, so that he might have something to eat." As he spoke, the fox wiped off a tear. Pinocchio, almost in tears himself, whispered in the cat's ear, "If all the cats were like you, how lucky the mice would be!" "And what are you doing here?" the fox asked the Marionette. "I am waiting for my father, who will be here at any moment now." "And your gold pieces?" "I still have them in my pocket, except one which I spent at the Inn of the Red Lobster." "To think that those 4 gold pieces might become 2,000 tomorrow! Why don't you listen to me? Why don't you sow them in the field of wonders? Today it is impossible. I'll go with you some other time." "Another day will be too late," said the fox. "Why?" "Because that field has been bought by a very rich man, and today is the last day that it will be open to the public." "How far is this field of wonders?" Only 2 miles away. Will you come with us? We'll be there in half an hour. You can sow the money, and after a few minutes you will gather your 2,000 coins and return home rich. Are you coming?" Pinocchio hesitated a moment before answering, for he remembered the good fairy, old Geppetto, and the advice of the talking cricket. Then he ended by doing what all boys do when they have no heart and little brain. He shrugged his shoulders and said to the fox and the cat, "Let us go. I am with you." And they went. They walked and walked for half a day at least, and at last they came to the town called the City of Simple Simons. As soon as they entered the town, Pinocchio noticed that all the streets were filled with hairless dogs, yawning from hunger, with sheared sheep trembling with cold, with combless chickens begging for a grain of wheat, with large butterflies, unable to use their wings because they had sold all their lovely colors, with tailless peacocks, ashamed to show themselves, and with bedraggled pheasants, scuttling away hurriedly, grieving for their bright feathers of gold and silver, lost to them forever. Through this crowd of paupers and beggars a beautiful coach passed now and again. Within it sat either a fox, a hawk, or a vulture. "Where is the Field of Wonders?" asked Pinocchio, growing tired of waiting. "Be patient. It is only a few more steps away." They passed through the city, and, just outside the walls, they stepped into a lonely field, which looked more or less like any other field. "Here we are," said the fox to the Marionette. "Dig a hole here, and put the gold pieces into it." The Marionette obeyed. He dug the hole, put the 4 gold pieces into it, and covered them up very carefully. "Now," said the fox, "go to that near-by brook, bring back a pail full of water, and sprinkle it over the spot." Pinocchio followed the directions closely, but as he had no pail, he pulled off his shoe, filled it with water, and sprinkled the earth which covered the gold. Then he asked, "Anything else?" "Nothing else," answered the fox. "Now we can go. Return here within 20 minutes, and you will find the vine grown and the branches filled with gold pieces." Pinocchio, beside himself with joy, thanked the fox and the cat many times, and promised them each a beautiful gift. "We don't want any of your gifts," answered the 2 rogues. "It is enough for us that we have helped you to become rich with little or no trouble. For this we are as happy as kings." They said good-bye to Pinocchio, and, wishing him good luck, went on their way. End of chapter 18.
Chapter 19. Pinocchio is robbed of his gold pieces, and in punishment is sentenced to 4 months in prison. If the Marionette had been told to wait a day instead of 20 minutes, the time could not have seemed longer to him. He walked impatiently to and fro, and finally turned his nose toward the Field of Wonders. As he walked with hurried steps, his heart beat with an excited tick-tack, tick-tack, just as if it were a wall clock, and his busy brain kept thinking, "What if, instead of 1,000, I should find 2,000? Or instead of 2,000, I should find 5,000 or 100,000? I'll build myself a beautiful palace with 1,000 stables filled with 1,000 wooden horses to play with, a cellar overflowing with lemonade and ice cream soda, and a library of candies and fruits and cakes and cookies." Thus amusing himself with fancies, he came to the field. There he stopped to see if, by chance, a vine filled with gold coins was in sight, but he saw nothing. He took a few steps forward, and still nothing. He stepped onto the field. He went up to the place where he had dug the hole and buried the gold pieces. Again, nothing. Pinocchio became very thoughtful, and, forgetting his good manners altogether, he pulled a hand out of his pocket and gave his head a thorough scratching. As he did so, he heard a hearty burst of laughter close to his head. He turned sharply, and there, just above him on the branch of a tree, sat a large parrot, busily preening his feathers. "What are you laughing at?" Pinocchio asked peevishly. "I'm laughing because in preening my feathers I tickled myself under the wings." The Marionette did not answer. He walked to the brook, filled his shoe with water, and once more sprinkled the ground which covered the gold pieces. Again another burst of laughter, even more impertinent than the first, was heard in a quiet field. "Well," cried the Marionette angrily this time, "may I know, Mr. Parrot, what amuses you so?" "I'm laughing at those simpletons who believe everything they hear, and who allow themselves to be caught so easily in the traps set for them." "Do you perhaps mean me?" "I certainly do mean you, poor Pinocchio. You who are such a little silly as to believe that gold can be sown in a field just like beans and squash. I too believed that once, and today I'm very sorry for it. Today, but too late. I have reached the conclusion that in order to come by money honestly, one must work and know how to earn it with hand or brain." "I don't know what you're talking about," said the Marionette, who was beginning to tremble with fear. "Too bad. I'll explain myself better," said the Parrot. "While you were away in the city, the Fox and the Cat returned here in a great hurry. They took the 4 gold pieces which you had buried and ran away as fast as the wind. If you can catch them, you're a brave one." Pinocchio's mouth opened wide. He would not believe the Parrot's words and began to dig furiously at the earth. He dug and he dug it till the hole was as big as himself, but no money was there. Every penny was gone. In desperation he ran to the city and went straight to the courthouse to report the robbery to the magistrate. The judge was a monkey, a large gorilla, venerable with age. A flowing white beard covered his chest, and he wore gold-rimmed spectacles, from which the glasses had dropped out. The reason for wearing these, he said, was that his eyes had been weakened by the work of many years. Pinocchio, standing before him, told his pitiful tale word by word. He gave the names and descriptions of the robbers and begged for justice. The judge listened to him with great patience. A kind look shone in his eyes. He became very much interested in the story. He felt moved. He almost wept. When the Marionette had no more to say, the judge put out his hand and rang a bell. At the sound, 2 large mastiffs appeared wearing carbineers' uniforms. Then the magistrate, pointing to Pinocchio, said in a solemn voice, "This poor simpleton has been robbed of 4 gold pieces. Take him, therefore, and throw him in prison." The Marionette, on hearing this sentence passed on him, was thoroughly stunned. He tried to protest, but the 2 officers clapped their paws on his mouth and hustled him away to jail. There he had to remain for 4 long, weary months, and if it had not been for a very lucky chance, he probably would have to stay there longer. For, my dear children, as you must know that it happened just as the young emperor who ruled over the city of Simple Simons had gained a victory over his enemy, and in celebration thereof he ordered illuminations, fireworks, shows of all kinds, and best of all, the opening of all prison doors. "If the others go, I go too," said Pinocchio to the jailer. "Not you," answered the jailer. "You are one of those—" I beg your pardon," interrupted Pinocchio. "I, too, am a thief." "In that case you are free to go," said the jailer. Taking off his cap, he bowed low. He opened the door of the prison, and Pinocchio ran out and away, with never a look backward. End of chapter 19.
Chapter 20. Freed from prison, Pinocchio sets out to return to the fairy, but on the way he meets a serpent and later is caught in a trap. Fancy the happiness of Pinocchio on finding himself free! Without saying yes or no, he fled from the city and set out on the road that was to take him back to the house of the lovely fairy. It had rained for many days, and the road was so muddy that, at times, Pinocchio sank down almost to his knees, but he kept on bravely. Tormented by the wish to see his father and his fairy sister with azure hair, he raced like a greyhound. As he ran, he was splashed with mud, even up to his cap. "How unhappy I have been," he said to himself, "and yet I deserve everything, for I am certainly very stubborn and stupid. I will always have my own way. I won't listen to those who love me and who have more brains than I. But from now on I'll be different, and I'll try to become a most obedient boy. I have found out, beyond any doubt whatsoever, that disobedient boys are certainly far from happy, and that, in the long run, they always lose out. I wonder if father is waiting for me. Will I find him at the fairy's house? It is so long, poor man, since I have seen him, and I do so want his love and his kisses. And will the fairy ever forgive me for all I have done? She who has been so good to me and to whom I owe my life. Can there be a worse or more heartless boy than I am anywhere?" As he spoke, he stopped suddenly, frozen with terror. What was the matter? An immense serpent lay stretched across the road, a serpent with bright green skin, fiery eyes which glowed and burned, and a pointed tail that smoked like a chimney. How frightened was poor Pinocchio! He ran back wildly for half a mile, and at last settled himself atop a heap of stones, to wait for the serpent to go on his way and leave the road clear for him. He waited an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, but the serpent was always there, and even from afar one could see the flash of his red eyes and the column of smoke which rose from his long pointed tail. Pinocchio, trying to feel very brave, walked straight up to him and said in a sweet, soothing voice, "I beg your pardon, Mr. Serpent. Would you be so kind as to step aside to let me pass?" He might as well have talked to a wall. The serpent never moved. Once more, in the same sweet voice, he spoke, "You must know, Mr. Serpent, that I am going home where my father is waiting for me. It is so long since I have seen him. Would you mind very much if I passed?" He waited for some sign of an answer to his questions, but the answer did not come. On the contrary, the green serpent, who had seemed, until then, wide awake and full of life, became suddenly very quiet and still. His eyes closed and his tail stopped smoking. "Is he dead, I wonder?" said Pinocchio, rubbing his hands together happily. Without a moment's hesitation he started to step over him, but he had just raised one leg when the serpent shot up like a spring and the marionette fell head over heels backward. He fell so awkwardly that his head stuck in the mud, and there he stood with his legs straight up in the air. At the sight of the marionette kicking and squirming like a young whirlwind, the serpent laughed so heartily and so long that at last he burst an artery and died on the spot. Pinocchio freed himself from his awkward position and once more began to run in order to reach the fairy's house before dark. As he went, the pangs of hunger grew so strong that, unable to withstand them, he jumped into a field to pick a few grapes that tempted him. Woe to him! No sooner had he reached the grapevine than crack went his legs. The poor marionette was caught in a trap, set there by a farmer for some weasels which came every night to steal his chickens. End of Chapter 20.
Chapter 21. Pinocchio is caught by a farmer, who uses him as a watchdog for his chicken coop. Pinocchio, as you may well imagine, began to scream and weep and beg. But all was of no use, for no houses were to be seen, and not a soul passed by on the road. Night came on, a little because of the sharp pain in his legs, a little because of fright at finding himself alone in the darkness of the field. The marionette was about to faint, when he saw a tiny glowworm flickering by. He called to her and said, "Dear little glowworm, will you set me free?" "Poor little fellow," replied the glowworm, stopping to look at him with pity. "How came you to be caught in this trap?" "I stepped into this lonely field to take a few grapes and—" "Are the grapes yours?" "No." "Who has taught you to take things that do not belong to you?" "I was hungry." "Hunger, my boy, is no reason for taking something which belongs to another." It's true, cried Pinocchio in tears. "I won't do it again." Just then the conversation was interrupted by approaching footsteps. It was the owner of the field, who was coming on tiptoes to see if by chance he had caught the weasels which had been eating his chickens. Great was his surprise when, holding up his lantern, he saw that, instead of a weasel, he had caught a boy. "Ah, you little thief!" said the farmer in an angry voice. "So you are the one who steals my chickens." "Not I, no, no!" cried Pinocchio, sobbing bitterly. "I came here only to take a very few grapes." "He who steals grapes may very easily steal chickens also. Take my word for it, I'll give you a lesson that you'll remember for a long while." He opened the trap, grabbed the marionette by the collar, and carried him to the house as if he were a puppy. When he reached the yard in front of the house, he flung him to the ground, put a foot on his neck, and said to him roughly, "It is late now, and it's time for bed. Tomorrow will settle matters. In the meantime, since my watchdog died today, you may take his place and guard my hen-house." No sooner said than done. He slipped the dog collar around Pinocchio's neck and tightened it, so that it would not come off. A long iron chain was tied to the collar. The other end of the chain was nailed to the wall. "If tonight it should happen to rain," said the farmer, "you can sleep in that little dog-house near by, where you will find plenty of straw for a soft bed. It has been Melampo's bed for 3 years, and it will be good enough for you. And if, by any chance, any thieves should come, be sure to bark." After this last warning, the farmer went into the house and closed the door and barred it. Poor Pinocchio huddled close to the dog-house, more dead than alive, from cold, hunger, and fright. Now and again he pulled and tugged at the collar, which nearly choked him, and cried out in a weak voice, "I deserve it. Yes, I deserve it. I have been nothing but a truant and a vagabond. I have never obeyed anyone, and I have always done as I pleased. If I were only like so many others, and had studied and worked and stayed with my poor old father, I should not find myself here now, in this field and in the darkness, taking the place of a farmer's watchdog. Oh, if I could start all over again! But what is done can't be undone, and I must be patient." After this little sermon to himself, which came from the very depths of his heart, Pinocchio went into the dog-house and fell asleep. End of Chapter 21.
Chapter 22. Pinocchio discovers the thieves, and as a reward for faithfulness he regains his liberty. Even though a boy may be very unhappy, he very seldom loses sleep over his worries. The marionette, being no exception to this rule, slept on peacefully for a few hours, till well along toward midnight, when he was awakened by strange whisperings and stealthy sounds coming from the yard. He stuck his nose out of the dog-house and saw 4 slender, hairy animals. They were weasels, small animals very fond of both eggs and chickens. One of them left her companions and, going to the door of the dog-house, said in a sweet voice, "Good evening, Melampo." "My name is not Melampo," answered Pinocchio. "Who are you, then?" "I am Pinocchio." "What are you doing here?" "I'm the watchdog." "But where is Melampo? Where is the old dog who used to live in this house?" "He died this morning." "Died? Poor beast! He was so good. Still, judging by your face, I think you, too, are a good-natured dog. I beg your pardon, I am not a dog. What are you, then? I am a marionette. Are you taking the place of the watchdog? I'm sorry to say that I am. I'm being punished. Well, I shall make the same terms with you that we had with the dead Melampo. I'm sure you will be glad to hear them. And what are the terms? This is our plan. We'll come once in a while, as in the past, to pay a visit to this henhouse, and we'll take away 8 chickens. Of these, 7 are for us, and 1 for you, provided, of course, that you will make believe you are sleeping and will not bark for the farmer. Did Melampo really do that? Asked Pinocchio. Indeed he did, and because of that we were the best of friends. Sleep away peacefully, and remember that before we go, we shall leave you a nice fat chicken all ready for your breakfast in the morning. Is that understood? Even too well, answered Pinocchio, and shaking his head in a threatening manner, he seemed to say, We'll talk this over in a few minutes, my friends. As soon as the 4 weasels had talked things over, they went straight to the chicken coop, which stood close to the doghouse. Digging busily with teeth and claws, they opened the little door and slipped in. But they were no sooner in than they heard the door close with a sharp bang. The one who had done the trick was Pinocchio, who, not satisfied with that, dragged a heavy stone in front of it. That done, he started to bark, and he barked as if he were a real watchdog. Bow, wow, wow, bow, wow. The farmer heard the loud barks and jumped out of bed. Taking his gun, he leaped to the window and shouted, What's the matter? The thieves are here, answered Pinocchio. Where are they? In the chicken coop. I'll come down in a second. And in fact, he was down in the yard in a twinkling, and running toward the chicken coop. He opened the door, pulled out the weasels one by one, and after tying them in a bag, said to them in a happy voice, You're in my hands at last. I could punish you now, but I'll wait. In the morning you may come with me to the inn, and there you'll make a fine dinner for some hungry mortal. It is really too great an honor for you, one you do not deserve. But, as you see, I am really a very kind and generous man, and I am going to do this for you. Then he went up to Pinocchio and began to pet and caress him. How did you ever find them out so quickly? And to think that Melampo, my faithful Melampo, never saw them in all these years. The marionette could have told, then and there, all he knew about the shameful contract between the dog and the weasels. But thinking of the dead dog, he said to himself, Melampo is dead. What is the use of accusing him? The dead are gone, and they cannot defend themselves. The best thing to do is to leave them in peace. Were you awake or asleep when they came? Continued the farmer. I was asleep, answered Pinocchio, but they awakened me with their whisperings. One of them even came to the door of the doghouse and said to me, If you promise not to bark, we will make you a present of one of the chickens for your breakfast. Did you hear that? They had the audacity to make such a proposition as that to me. For you must know that though I am a very wicked marionette, full of faults, still I never have been, nor ever shall be, bribed. Fine boy, cried the farmer, slapping him on the shoulder in a friendly way. You ought to be proud of yourself. And to show you what I think of you, you are free from this instant. And he slipped the dog collar from his neck. End of chapter 22.
Chapter 23. Pinocchio weeps upon learning that the lovely maiden with azure hair is dead. He meets a pigeon who carries him to the seashore. He throws himself into the sea to go to the aid of his father. As soon as Pinocchio no longer felt the shameful weight of the dog collar around his neck, he started to run across the fields and meadows, and never stopped till he came to the main road that was to take him to the fairy's house. When he reached it, he looked into the valley far below him, and there he saw the wood where unluckily he had met the fox and the cat, and the tall oak tree where he had been hanged. And though he searched far and near, he could not see the house where the fairy with the azure hair lived. He became terribly frightened, and running as fast as he could, he finally came to the spot where it had once stood. The little house was no longer there. In its place lay a small marble slab, which bore this sad inscription: Here lies the lovely fairy with azure hair, who died of grief when abandoned by her little brother Pinocchio. The poor marionette was heartbroken at reading these words. He fell to the ground, and covering the cold marble with kisses, burst into bitter tears. He cried all night, and dawn found him still there, though his tears had dried, and only hard, dry sobs shook his wooden frame. But these were so loud that they could be heard by the faraway hills. As he sobbed, he said to himself, "Oh, my fairy, my dear, dear fairy, why did you die? Why did I not die, who am so bad, instead of you, who are so good? And my father, where can he be? Please, dear fairy, tell me where he is, and I shall never, never leave him again. You are not really dead, are you? If you love me, you will come back, alive as before. Don't you feel sorry for me? I'm so lonely. If the 2 assassins come, they'll hang me again from the giant oak tree, and I will really die this time. What shall I do alone in the world, now that you are dead and my father is lost? Where shall I eat? Where shall I sleep? Who will make my new clothes? Oh, I want to die. Yes, I want to die. Oh, oh, oh." Poor Pinocchio! He even tried to tear his hair, but as it was only painted on his wooden head, he could not even pull it. Just then a large pigeon flew far above him. Seeing the marionette, he cried to him, "Tell me, little boy, what are you doing down there?" "Can't you see? I'm crying," cried Pinocchio, lifting his head toward the voice and rubbing his eyes with his sleeve. "Tell me," asked the pigeon, "do you by chance know of a marionette, Pinocchio by name?" "Pinocchio? Did you say Pinocchio?" replied the marionette, jumping to his feet. "Why, I am Pinocchio." At this answer the pigeon flew swiftly down to the earth. He was much larger than a turkey. "Then you know Geppetto also." "Do I know him? He's my father, my poor dear father. Has he perhaps spoken to you of me? Will you take me to him? Is he still alive? Answer me, please. Is he still alive?" "I left him 3 days ago on the shore of a large sea." "What was he doing?" "He was building a little boat with which to cross the ocean. For the last 4 months that poor man has been wandering around Europe looking for you. Not having found you yet, he has made up his mind to look for you in the New World, far across the ocean." "How far is it from here to the shore?" asked Pinocchio anxiously. "More than 50 miles." 50 miles! Oh, dear pigeon, how I wish I had your wings. If you want to come, I'll take you with me." "How?" "Astride my back. Are you very heavy?" "Heavy? Not at all. I'm only a feather." "Very well." Saying nothing more, Pinocchio jumped on the pigeon's back, and, as he settled himself, he cried out gaily, gallop on, my pretty steed. I am in a great hurry." The pigeon flew away, and in a few minutes he had reached the clouds. The marionette looked to see what was below him. His head swam, and he was so frightened that he clutched wildly at the pigeon's neck to keep himself from falling. They flew all day. Toward evening the pigeon said, "I'm very thirsty." "And I'm very hungry," said Pinocchio. "Let us stop a few minutes at that pigeon coop down there. Then we can go on and be at the seashore in the morning." They went into the empty coop, and there they found nothing but a bowl of water and a small basket filled with chickpeas. The marionette had always hated chickpeas. According to him, they had always made him sick. But that night he ate them with a relish. As he finished them, he turned to the pigeon and said, "I never should have thought that chickpeas could be so good." "You must remember, my boy," answered the pigeon, "that hunger is the best sauce." After resting a few minutes longer, they set out again. The next morning they were at the seashore. Pinocchio jumped off the pigeon's back, and the pigeon, not wanting any thanks for a kind deed, flew away swiftly and disappeared. The shore was full of people, shrieking and tearing their hair as they looked toward the sea. "What has happened?" asked Pinocchio of a little old woman. "A poor old father lost his only son some time ago, and today he built a tiny boat for himself in order to go in search of him across the ocean. The water is very rough, and we're afraid he will be drowned." "Where is the little boat?" "There, straight down there," answered the little old woman, pointing to a tiny shadow no bigger than a nutshell floating on the sea. Pinocchio looked closely for a few minutes and then gave a sharp cry. "It's my father! It's my father!" Meanwhile the little boat, tossed about by the hungry waters, appeared and disappeared in the waves, and Pinocchio, standing on a high rock, tired out with searching, waved to him with hand and cap and even with his nose. It looked as if Geppetto, though far away from the shore, recognized his son, for he took off his cap and waved also. He seemed to be trying to make everyone understand that he would come back if he were able, but the sea was so heavy that he could do nothing with his oars. Suddenly a huge wave came, and the boat disappeared. They waited and waited for it, but it was gone. "Poor man," said the fisher folk on the shore, whispering a prayer as they turned to go home. Just then a desperate cry was heard. Turning around, the fisher folk saw Pinocchio dive into the sea, and heard him cry out, "I'll save him! I'll save my father!" The marionette, being made of wood, floated easily along and swam like a fish in the rough water. Now and again he disappeared, only to reappear once more. In a twinkling he was far away from land. At last he was completely lost to view. "Poor boy!" cried the fisher folk on the shore, and again they mumbled a few prayers as they returned home. End of chapter 23.
Chapter 24. Pinocchio reaches the island of the busy bees and finds the fairy once more. Pinocchio, spurred on by the hope of finding his father and of being in time to save him, swam all night long. And what a horrible night it was! It poured rain, it hailed, it thundered, and the lightning was so bright that it turned the night into day. At dawn he saw, not far away from him, a long stretch of sand. It was an island in the middle of the sea. Pinocchio tried his best to get there, but he couldn't. The waves played with him and tossed him about as if he were a twig or a bit of straw. At last, and luckily for him, a tremendous wave tossed him to the very spot where he wanted to be. The blow from the wave was so strong that as he fell to the ground, his joints cracked and almost broke. But, nothing daunted, he jumped to his feet and cried, "Once more I have escaped with my life!" Little by little the sky cleared. The sun came out in full splendor, and the sea became as calm as a lake. Then the marionette took off his clothes and laid them on the sand to dry. He looked over the waters to see whether he might catch sight of a boat with a little man in it. He searched and he searched, but he saw nothing except sea and sky, and far away a few sails, so small that they might have been birds. "If only I knew the name of this island," he said to himself. "If I even knew what kind of people I would find here. But whom shall I ask? There is no one here." The idea of finding himself in so lonesome a spot made him so sad that he was about to cry, but just then he saw a big fish swimming nearby, with his head far out of the water. Not knowing what to call him, the marionette said to him, "Hey there, Mr. Fish, may I have a word with you?" "Even do, if you want," answered the fish, who happened to be a very polite dolphin. "Will you please tell me if, on this island, there are places where one may eat without necessarily being eaten?" "Surely there are," answered the dolphin. "In fact, you will find one not far from this spot." "And how shall I get there?" "Take that path on your left and follow your nose. You can't go wrong." "Tell me another thing. You who travel day and night through the sea, did you not perhaps meet a little boat with my father in it?" "And who is your father?" "He is the best father in the world, even as I am the worst son that can be found." "In the storm of last night," answered the Dolphin, "the little boat must have been swamped." "And my father?" "By this time he must have been swallowed by the terrible shark, which for the last few days has been bringing terror to these waters." "Is the shark very big?" asked Pinocchio, who was beginning to tremble with fright. "Is he big?" replied the Dolphin. "Just to give you an idea of his size, let me tell you that he is larger than a 5-story building, and that he has a mouth so big, so deep, that a whole train and engine could easily get into it." "Mother mine!" cried the Marionette, scared to death, and dressed himself as fast as he could. He turned to the Dolphin and said, "Farewell, Mr. Fish. Pardon the bother, and many thanks for your kindnesses." This said, he took the path at so swift a gait that he seemed to fly, and at every small sound he heard, he turned in fear to see whether the terrible shark, 5 stories high and with a train in his mouth, was following him. After walking a half-hour, he came to a small country called the Land of the Busy Bees. The streets were filled with people running to and fro about their tasks. Everyone worked. Everyone had something to do. Even if one were to search with a lantern, not one idle man or one tramp could have been found. "I understand," said Pinocchio at once wearily. "This is no place for me. I was not born for work." But in the meantime he began to feel hungry, for it was 24 hours since he had eaten. What was to be done? There were only 2 means left to him in order to get a bite to eat. He had either to work or to beg. He was ashamed to beg, because his father had always preached to him that begging should be done only by the sick or the old. He had said that the real poor in this world, deserving of our pity and help, were only those who, either through age or sickness, had lost the means of earning their bread with their own hands. All others should work, and if they didn't, and went hungry, so much the worse for them. Just then a man passed by, worn out and wet with perspiration, pulling with difficulty 2 heavy carts filled with coal. Pinocchio looked at him, and judging him by his looks to be a kind man, said to him, with eyes downcast in shame, "Will you be so good as to give me a penny, for I am faint with hunger?" "Not only 1 penny," answered the coal man. "I'll give you 4 if you will help me pull these 2 wagons." "I am surprised," answered the Marionette, very much offended. "I wish you to know that I have never been a donkey, nor have I ever pulled a wagon." "So much the better for you," answered the coal man. "Then, my boy, if you are really faint with hunger, eat 2 slices of your pride, and I hope they don't give you indigestion." A few minutes after, a bricklayer passed by, carrying a pail full of plaster on his shoulder. "Good man, will you be kind enough to give a penny to a poor boy who is yawning from hunger?" "Gladly," answered the bricklayer. "Come with me, and carry some plaster, and instead of 1 penny, I'll give you 5. "But the plaster is heavy," answered Pinocchio, "and the work is too hard for me." "Well, if the work is too hard for you, my boy, enjoy your yawns, and may they bring you luck." In less than half an hour, at least 20 people passed by, and Pinocchio begged of each one. But they all answered, "Aren't you ashamed? Instead of being a beggar in the streets, why don't you look for work and earn your own bread?" Finally, a little woman went by carrying 2 jugs of water. "Good woman, will you allow me to have a drink from one of your jugs?" asked Pinocchio, who was burning up with thirst. "With pleasure, my boy," she answered, setting the 2 jugs on the ground before him. When Pinocchio had had his fill, he grumbled as he wiped his mouth, "My thirst is gone. If I could only as easily get rid of my hunger." On hearing these words, the good little woman immediately said, "If you will help me carry these jugs home, I'll give you a slice of bread." Pinocchio looked at the jug and said neither yes nor no. "And with the bread, I'll give you a nice dish of cauliflower with white sauce on it." Pinocchio gave the jug another look and said neither yes nor no. "And after the cauliflower, some cake and jam." At this last bribery, Pinocchio could no longer resist and said firmly, "Very well, I will take the jug home for you." The jug was very heavy, and the Marionette, not being strong enough to carry it with his hands, had to put it on his head. When they arrived home, the little woman made Pinocchio sit down at a small table and placed before him the bread, the cauliflower, and the cake. Pinocchio did not eat. He devoured. His stomach seemed a bottomless pit. His hunger finally appeased, he raised his head to thank his kind benefactress. But he had not looked at her long when he gave a cry of surprise and sat there with his eyes wide open, his fork in the air, and his mouth filled with bread and cauliflower. "Why all this surprise?" asked the good woman, laughing. Because, answered Pinocchio, stammering and stuttering, because you look like, you remind me of, yes, the same voice, the same eyes, the same hair, yes. You have also the same azure hair she had. Oh, my little fairy, tell me that it is you. Don't make me cry any longer. If you only knew, I have cried so much, I have suffered so. And Pinocchio threw himself on the floor and clasped the knees of the mysterious little woman. End of Chapter 24. Chapter 25. Pinocchio promises the fairy to be good and to study, as he is growing tired of being a marionette, and wishes to become a real boy. If Pinocchio cried much longer, the little woman thought he would melt away, so she finally admitted that she was the little fairy with azure hair. "You are a rascal of a marionette. How did you know it was I?" she asked, laughing. "My love for you told me who you were. Do you remember? You left me when I was a little girl, and now you find me a grown woman. I am so old I could almost be your mother. I am very glad of that, for then I can call you mother instead of sister. For a long time I have wanted a mother, just like other boys. But how did you grow so quickly? That is a secret. Tell it to me. I want to grow a little. Look at me. I have never grown higher than a penny's worth of cheese." "But you cannot grow," answered the fairy. "Why not?" "Because marionettes never grow. They are born marionettes, they live marionettes, and they die marionettes." "Oh, I am tired of always being a marionette," cried Pinocchio disgustedly. "It's about time for me to grow into a man as everyone else does." "And you will, if you deserve it." "Really? What can I do to deserve it?" "It's a very simple matter. Try to act like a well-behaved child." "Don't you think I do?" "Far from it. Good boys are obedient, and you, on the contrary, and I never obey. Good boys love study and work, but you, I, on the contrary, am a lazy fellow and tramp all year round. Good boys always tell the truth, and I always tell lies. Good boys go gladly to school, and I get sick if I go to school. From now on I will be different." "Do you promise?" "I promise. I want to become a good boy and be a comfort to my father. Where is my poor father now?" "I do not know." "Will I ever be lucky enough to find him and embrace him once more?" "I think so. Indeed, I am sure of it." At this answer, Pinocchio's happiness was very great. He grasped the fairy's hands and kissed them so hard that it looked as if he had lost his head. Then, lifting his face, he looked at her lovingly and asked, "Tell me, little mother, it isn't true that you are dead, is it?" "It doesn't seem so," answered the fairy, smiling. "If you only knew how I suffered and how I wept when I read, 'Here lies—'" "I know, and for that I have forgiven you. The depth of your sorrow made me see that you have a kind heart. There is always hope for boys with hearts such as yours, though they may often be very mischievous. This is the reason why I have come so far to look for you. From now on, I'll be your own little mother." "Oh, how lovely!" cried Pinocchio, jumping with joy. "You will obey me always and do as I wish?" "Gladly, very gladly, more than gladly." "Beginning tomorrow," said the fairy, "you'll go to school every day." Pinocchio's face fell a little. "Then you will choose the trade you like best." Pinocchio became more serious. "What are you mumbling to yourself?" asked the fairy. "I was just saying," whined the marionette in a whisper, "that it seems too late for me to go to school now." "No, indeed. Remember, it is never too late to learn." "But I don't want either trade or profession." "Why?" "Because work wearies me." "My dear boy," said the fairy, "people who speak as you do usually end their days either in a prison or in a hospital. A man, remember, whether rich or poor, should do something in this world. No one can find happiness without work. Woe betide the lazy fellow. Laziness is a serious illness, and one must cure it immediately. Yes, even from early childhood. If not, it will kill you in the end." These words touched Pinocchio's heart. He lifted his eyes to his fairy and said seriously, "I'll work, I'll study, I'll do all you tell me. After all, the life of a marionette has grown very tiresome to me, and I want to become a boy, no matter how hard it is. You promise that, do you not?" "Yes, I promise, and now it is up to you." End of Chapter 25.
Chapter 26. Pinocchio goes to the seashore with his friends to see the terrible shark. In the morning, bright and early, Pinocchio started for school. Imagine what the boys said when they saw a marionette enter the classroom. They laughed until they cried. Everyone played tricks on him. One pulled his hat off, another tugged at his coat, a third tried to paint a mustache under his nose. One even attempted to tie strings to his feet and his hands to make him dance. For a while, Pinocchio was very calm and quiet. Finally, however, he lost all patience, and turning to his tormentors, he said to them threateningly, "Careful, boys, I haven't come here to be made fun of. I'll respect you, and I want you to respect me." "Hurrah for Dr. Know-all! You have spoken like a printed book," howled the boys, bursting with laughter. One of them, more impudent than the rest, put out his hand to pull the marionette's nose. But he was not quick enough, for Pinocchio stretched his leg under the table and kicked him hard on the shin. "Oh, what hard feet!" cried the boy, rubbing the spot where the marionette had kicked him. "And what elbows! They are even harder than the feet!" shouted another one, who, because of some other trick, had received a blow in the stomach. With that kick and that blow, Pinocchio gained everybody's favor. Everyone admired him, danced attendance upon him, petted and caressed him. As the days passed into weeks, even the teacher praised him, for he saw him attentive, hard-working, and wide awake, always the first to come in the morning and the last to leave when school was over. Pinocchio's only fault was that he had too many friends. Among these were many well-known rascals who cared not a jot for study or for success. The teacher warned him each day, and even the good fairy repeated to him many times, "Take care, Pinocchio. Those bad companions will sooner or later make you lose your love for study. Some day they will lead you astray." "There's no such danger," answered the marionette, shrugging his shoulders and pointing to his forehead as if to say, "I'm too wise." So it happened that one day, as he was walking to school, he met some boys who ran up to him and said, "Have you heard the news?" "No." "A shark as big as a mountain has been seen near the shore." "Really? I wonder if it could be the same one I heard of when my father was drowned." "We are going to see it. Are you coming?" "No, not I. I must go to school." "What do you care about school? You can go there tomorrow. With a lesson more or less, we are always the same donkeys." "And what will the teacher say?" "Let him talk. He is paid to grumble all day long." "And my mother?" "Mothers don't know anything," answered those scamps. "Do you know what I'll do?" said Pinocchio. "For certain reasons of mine, I too want to see that shark, but I'll go after school. I can see him then as well as now." "Poor simpleton!" cried one of the boys. "Do you think that a fish of that size will stand there waiting for you? He turns and off he goes, and no one will ever be the wiser." "How long does it take from here to the shore?" asked the marionette. 1 hour there and back." "Very well, then. Let's see who gets there first," cried Pinocchio. At the signal, the little troop with books under their arms dashed across the fields. Pinocchio led the way, running as if on wings, the others following as fast as they could. Now and again he looked back, and, seeing his followers hot and tired, and with tongues hanging out, he laughed out heartily. Unhappy boy! If he had only known then the dreadful things that were to happen to him on account of his disobedience. End of chapter 26.
Chapter 27. The great battle between Pinocchio and his playmates. One is wounded. Pinocchio is arrested. Going like the wind, Pinocchio took but a very short time to reach the shore. He glanced all about him, but there was no sign of a shark. The sea was as smooth as glass. "Hey there, boys, where's that shark?" he asked, turning to his playmates. "He may have gone for his breakfast," said one of them, laughing. "Or perhaps he went to bed for a little nap," said another, laughing also. From the answers and the laughter which followed them, Pinocchio understood that the boys had played a trick on him. "What now?" he said angrily to them. "What's the joke?" "Oh, the joke's on you," cried his tormentors, laughing more heartily than ever, and dancing gaily around the marionette. "And that is, that we have made you stay out of school to come with us. Aren't you ashamed of being such a goody-goody and of studying so hard? You never have a bit of enjoyment. And what is it to you if I do study? What does the teacher think of us, you mean? Why, don't you see? If you study and we don't, we pay for it. After all, it's only fair to look out for ourselves. What do you want me to do? Hate school and books and teachers, as we all do. They are your worst enemies, you know, and they like to make you as unhappy as they can. And if I go on studying, what will you do to me? You'll pay for it. Really, you amuse me, answered the Marionette, nodding his head. Hey, Pinocchio, cried the tallest of them all. That will do. We are tired of hearing you bragging about yourself, you little turkey cock. You may not be afraid of us, but remember, we are not afraid of you either. You are alone, you know, and we are 7. Like 7 sins, said Pinocchio, still laughing. Did you hear that? He has insulted us all. He called us sins. Pinocchio, apologize for that, or look out. Cuckoo, said the Marionette, mocking them with his thumb to his nose. You'll be sorry. Cuckoo. We'll whip you soundly. Cuckoo. You'll go home with a broken nose. Cuckoo. Very well then, take that, and keep it for your supper, called out the boldest of his tormentors. And with the words, he gave Pinocchio a terrible blow on the head. Pinocchio answered with another blow, and that was the signal for the beginning of the fray. In a few moments, the fight raged hot and heavy on both sides. Pinocchio, although alone, defended himself bravely. With those 2 wooden feet of his, he worked so fast that his opponents kept at a respectful distance. Wherever they landed, they left their painful mark, and the boys could only run away and howl. Enraged at not being able to fight the Marionette at close quarters, they started to throw all kinds of books at him. Readers, geographies, histories, grammars flew in all directions. But Pinocchio was keen of eye and swift of movement, and the books only passed over his head, landed in the sea, and disappeared. The fish, thinking they might be good to eat, came to the top of the water in great numbers. Some took a nibble, some took a bite, but no sooner had they tasted a page or 2 than they spat them out with a wry face, as if to say, "What a horrible taste! Our own food is so much better." Meanwhile the battle waxed more and more furiously. At the noise, a large crab crawled slowly out of the water, and, with a voice that sounded like a trombone suffering from a cold, he cried out, "Stop fighting, you rascals! These battles between you boys rarely end well. Trouble is sure to come to you." Poor crab, he might as well have spoken to the wind. Instead of listening to his good advice, Pinocchio turned to him and said as roughly as he knew how, "Keep quiet, ugly crab. It would be better for you to chew a few cough drops to get rid of that cold you have. Go to bed and sleep. You will feel better in the morning." In the meantime, the boys, having used all their books, looked around for new ammunition. Seeing Pinocchio's bundle lying idly nearby, they somehow managed to get hold of it. One of the books was a very large volume, an arithmetic text, heavily bound in leather. It was Pinocchio's pride. Among all his books, he liked that one the best. Thinking it would make a fine missile, one of the boys took hold of it and threw it with all his strength at Pinocchio's head. But instead of hitting the Marionette, the book struck one of the other boys, who, as pale as a ghost, cried out faintly, "Oh, mother, help! I'm dying!" and fell senseless to the ground. At the sight of that little pale corpse, the boys were so frightened that they turned tail and ran. In a few moments, all had disappeared. All except Pinocchio. Although scared to death by the horror of what had been done, he ran to the sea and soaked his handkerchief in the cool water, and with it bathed the head of his poor little schoolmate. Sobbing bitterly, he cried to him, saying, "Eugene, poor Eugene, open your eyes and look at me. Why don't you answer? I was not the one who hit you, you know. Believe me, I didn't do it. Open your eyes, Eugene. If you keep them shut, I'll die too. Oh, dear me, how shall I ever go home now? How shall I ever look at my little mother again? What will happen to me? Where shall I go? Where shall I hide? Oh, how much better it would have been, 1,000 times better, if only I had gone to school. Why did I listen to those boys? They always were a bad influence. And to think that the teacher had told me, and my mother too, beware of bad company. That's what she said. But I'm stubborn and proud. I listen, but always I do as I wish, and then I pay. I've never had a moment's peace since I've been born. Oh, dear, What will become of me? What will become of me?" Pinocchio went on crying and moaning and beating his head. Again and again he called to his little friend, when suddenly he heard heavy steps approaching. He looked up and saw 2 tall carabiners near him. "What are you doing stretched out on the ground?" they asked Pinocchio. "I'm helping this little schoolfellow of mine." "Has he fainted?" "I should say so," said one of the carabiners, bending to look at Eugene. "This boy has been wounded on the temple. Who has hurt him?" Not I," stammered the marionette, who had hardly a breath left in his whole body. "If it wasn't you, who was it then?" Not I," repeated Pinocchio. "And with what was he wounded?" "With this book," and the marionette picked up the arithmetic text to show it to the officer. "And whose book is this?" "Mine." "Enough. Not another word. Get up as quickly as you can and come along with us." But I—" "Come with us." "But I am innocent." "Come with us." Before starting out, the officers called out to several fishermen passing by in a boat and said to them, "Take care of this little fellow who has been hurt. Take him home and bind his wounds. Tomorrow we will come after him." Then they took hold of Pinocchio and, putting him between them, said to him in a rough voice, "March, and go quickly, or it will be the worse for you." They did not have to repeat their words. The marionette walked swiftly along the road to the village. But the poor fellow hardly knew what he was about. He thought he had a nightmare. He felt ill. His eyes saw everything double. His legs trembled. His tongue was dry, and, try as he might, he could not utter a single word. Yet, in spite of this numbness of feeling, he suffered keenly at the thought of passing under the windows of his good little fairy's house. What would she say on seeing him between 2 carabiners? They had just reached the village when a sudden gust of wind blew off Pinocchio's cap and made it go sailing far down the street. "Would you allow me," the marionette asked the carabiners, "to run after my cap?" "Very well, go, but hurry." The marionette went, picked up his cap, but instead of putting it on his head, he stuck it between his teeth and then raced toward the sea. He went like a bullet out of a gun. The carabiners, judging that it would be very difficult to catch him, sent a large mastiff after him, one that had won first prize in all the dog races. Pinocchio ran fast, and the dog ran faster. At so much noise, the people hung out of the windows or gathered in the street, anxious to see the end of the contest. But they were disappointed, for the dog and Pinocchio raised so much dust on the road that, after a few moments, it was impossible to see them. End of Chapter 27.
Chapter 28. Pinocchio runs the danger of being fried in a pan like a fish. During that wild chase, Pinocchio lived through a terrible moment when he almost gave himself up as lost. This was when Alidoro, that was the mastiff's name, in a frenzy of running came so near that he was on the very point of reaching him. The marionette heard, close behind him, the labored breathing of the beast who was fast on his trail, and now and again even felt his hot breath blow over him. Luckily by this time he was very near the shore, and the sea was in sight, in fact only a few short steps away. As soon as he set foot on the beach, Pinocchio gave a leap and fell into the water. Alidoro tried to stop, but as he was running very fast he couldn't, and he too landed far out in the sea. Strange though it may seem, the dog could not swim. He beat the water with his paws to hold himself up, but the harder he tried, the deeper he sank. As he stuck his head out once more, the poor fellow's eyes were bulging, and he barked out wildly, "I drown! I drown!" "Drown!" answered Pinocchio from afar, happy at his escape. "Help, Pinocchio! Dear little Pinocchio, save me from death!" At those cries of suffering, the marionette, who, after all, had a very kind heart, was moved to compassion. He turned toward the poor animal and said to him, "But if I help you, will you promise not to bother me again by running after me?" "I promise, I promise. Only hurry, for if you wait another second I'll be dead and gone." Pinocchio hesitated still another minute. Then, remembering how his father had often told him that a kind deed is never lost, he swam to Alidoro, and catching hold of his tail, dragged him to the shore. The poor dog was so weak he could not stand. He had swallowed so much salt water that he was swollen like a balloon. However, Pinocchio, not wishing to trust him too much, threw himself once again into the sea. As he swam away, he called out, "Good-bye, Alidoro. Good luck, and remember me to the family." "Goodbye, little Pinocchio," answered the dog. "A thousand thanks for having saved me from death. You did me a good turn, and in this world what is given is always returned. If the chance comes, I shall be there." Pinocchio went on swimming close to shore. At last he thought he had reached a safe place. Glancing up and down the beach, he saw the opening of a cave out of which rose a spiral of smoke. "In that cave," he said to himself, "there must be a fire. So much the better. I'll dry my clothes and warm myself, and then, well..." His mind made up, Pinocchio swam to the rocks, but as he started to climb, he felt something under him, lifting him up higher and higher. He tried to escape, but he was too late. To his great surprise, he found himself in a huge net, amid a crowd of fish of all kinds and sizes, who were fighting and struggling desperately to free themselves. At the same time, he saw a fisherman come out of the cave, a fisherman so ugly that Pinocchio thought he was a sea monster. In place of hair, his head was covered by a thick bush of green grass. Green was the skin of his body, green were his eyes, green was the long, long beard that reached to his feet. He looked like a giant lizard with legs and arms. When the fisherman pulled the net out of the sea, he cried out joyfully, "Blessed Providence! Once more I'll have a fine meal of fish." "Thank heaven I'm not a fish," said Pinocchio to himself, trying with these words to find a little courage. The fisherman took the net and the fish to the cave, a dark, gloomy, smoky place. In the middle of it, a pan full of oil sizzled over a smoky fire, sending out a repelling odor of tallow that took away one's breath. "Now let's see what kind of fish we have caught today," said the green fisherman. He put a hand as big as a spade into the net and pulled out a handful of mullets. "Fine mullets these," he said, after looking at them and smelling them with pleasure. After that he threw them into a large empty tub. Many times he repeated this performance. As he pulled each fish out of the net, his mouth watered with the thought of the good dinner coming, and he said, "Fine fish, these bass. Very tasty, these whitefish. Delicious flounders, these. What splendid crabs! And these dear little anchovies with their heads still on." As you can well imagine, the bass, the flounders, the whitefish, and even the little anchovies all went together into the tub to keep the mullets company. The last to come out of the net was Pinocchio. As soon as the fisherman pulled him out, his green eyes opened wide with surprise, and he cried out in fear, "What kind of fish is this? I don't remember eating anything like it." He looked at him closely, and after turning him over and over, he said at last, "I understand. He must be a crab." Pinocchio, mortified at being taken for a crab, said resentfully, "What nonsense! A crab indeed! I am no such thing. Beware how you deal with me. I am a marionette, I want you to know." "A marionette?" asked the fisherman. "I must admit that a marionette fish is for me an entirely new kind of fish. So much the better. I'll eat you with greater relish." "Eat me? But can't you understand that I'm not a fish? Can't you hear that I speak and think as you do?" "It's true," answered the fisherman. "But since I see that you are a fish, well able to talk and think as I do, I'll treat you with all due respect. And that as a sign of my particular esteem, I'll leave to you the choice of manner in which you are to be cooked. Do you wish to be fried in a pan, or do you prefer to be cooked with tomato sauce?" "To tell you the truth," answered Pinocchio, "if I must choose, I should much rather go free, so I may return home." "Are you fooling? Do you think that I want to lose the opportunity to taste such a rare fish? A marionette fish does not come very often to these seas. Leave it to me. I'll fry you in the pan with the others. I know you'll like it. It's always a comfort to find oneself in good company." The unlucky marionette, hearing this, began to cry and wail and beg. With tears streaming down his cheeks, he said, "How much better it would have been for me to go to school. I did listen to my playmates, and now I am paying for it. Oh, oh, oh." And as he struggled and squirmed like an eel to escape from him, The green fisherman took a stout cord and tied him hand and foot, and threw him into the bottom of the tub with the others. Then he pulled a wooden bowl full of flour out of a cupboard, and started to roll the fish into it, one by one. When they were white with it, he threw them into the pan. The first to dance in the hot oil were the mullets. The bass followed, then the whitefish, the flounders, and the anchovies. Pinocchio's turn came last. Seeing himself so near to death, and such a horrible death, he began to tremble so with fright that he had no voice left with which to beg for his life. The poor boy beseeched only with his eyes, but the green fisherman, not even noticing that it was he, turned him over and over in the flour until he looked like a marionette made of chalk. Then he took him by the head and... End of Chapter 28.
Chapter 29. Pinocchio returns to the fairy's house, and she promises him that, on the morrow, he will cease to be a marionette and become a boy. A wonderful party of coffee and milk to celebrate the great event. Mindful of what the fisherman had said, Pinocchio knew that all hope of being saved had gone. He closed his eyes and waited for the final moment. Suddenly, a large dog, attracted by the odor of boiling oil, came running into the cave. "Get out!" cried the fisherman threateningly, and still holding on to the marionette, who was all covered with flour. But the poor dog was very hungry, and whining and wagging his tail. He tried to say, "Give me a bite of the fish, and I'll go in peace." "Get out, I say," repeated the fisherman, and he drew back his foot to give the dog a kick. Then the dog, who, being really hungry, would take no refusal, turned in a rage toward the fisherman, and bared his terrible fangs. At that moment, a pitiful little voice was heard saying, "Save me, Alidoro! If you don't, I'll fry!" The dog immediately recognized Pinocchio's voice. Great was his surprise to find that the voice came from the little flour-covered bundle that the fisherman held in his hand. Then what did he do? With one great leap, he grasped that bundle in his mouth, and holding it lightly between his teeth, ran through the door and disappeared like a flash. The fisherman, angry at seeing his meal snatched from under his nose, ran after the dog, but a bad fit of coughing made him stop and turn back. Meanwhile, Alidoro, as soon as he had found the road which led to the village, stopped and dropped Pinocchio softly to the ground. "How much I do thank you," said the marionette. "It's not necessary," answered the dog. "You saved me once, and what is given is always returned. We are in this world to help one another." "But how did you get in that cave?" "I was lying here on the sand, more dead than alive, when an appetizing odor of fried fish came to me. That odor tickled my hunger, and I followed it. Oh, if I had come a moment later!" "Don't speak about it," wailed Pinocchio, still trembling with fright. "Don't say a word. If you had come a moment later, I would be fried, eaten, and digested by this time. Brrr! I shiver at the mere thought of it." Alidoro laughingly held out his paw to the marionette, who shook it heartily, feeling that now he and the dog were good friends. Then they bid each other good-bye, and the dog went home. Pinocchio, left alone, walked toward a little hut near-by, where an old man sat at the door sunning himself, and asked, "Tell me, good man, have you heard anything of a poor boy with a wounded head, whose name was Eugene?" "The boy was brought to this hut, and now—" "Now he's dead?" Pinocchio interrupted sorrowfully. "No, he is now alive, and he has already returned home." "Really, really?" cried the marionette, jumping around with joy. "Then the wound was not serious?" "But it might have been, even mortal," answered the old man, "for a heavy book was thrown at his head." "And who threw it?" "A schoolmate of his, a certain Pinocchio." "And who is this Pinocchio?" asked the marionette, feigning ignorance. "They say he is a mischief-maker, a tramp, a street urchin. Calumnies, all calumnies." "Do you know this Pinocchio?" "By sight," answered the marionette. "And what do you think of him?" answered the old man. "I think he is a very good boy, fond of study, obedient, kind to his father, and to his whole family." As he was telling all these enormous lies about himself, Pinocchio touched his nose and found it twice as long as it should be. Scared out of his wits, he cried out, "Don't listen to me, good man. All the wonderful things I have said are not true at all. I know Pinocchio well, and he is indeed a very wicked fellow, lazy and disobedient, who, instead of going to school, runs away with his playmates to have a good time." At this speech, his nose returned to its natural size. "Why are you so pale?" asked the old man suddenly. "Let me tell you. Without knowing it, I rubbed myself against a newly painted wall." He lied, ashamed to say that he had been made ready for the frying pan. "What have you done with your coat and your hat and your breeches?" "I met thieves, and they robbed me. Tell me, my good man, have you not, perhaps, a little suit to give me, so that I may go home?" "My boy, as for clothes, I have only a bag in which I keep hops. If you want it, take it. There it is." Pinocchio did not wait for him to repeat his words. He took the bag, which happened to be empty, and after cutting a big hole at the top and 2 at the sides, he slipped into it as if it were a shirt. Lightly clad as he was, he started out toward the village. Along the way he felt very uneasy. In fact, he was so unhappy that he went along, taking 2 steps forward and 1 back. And as he went, he said to himself, "How shall I ever face my good little fairy? What will she say when she sees me? Will she forgive this last trick of mine? I am sure she won't. Oh, no, she won't, and I deserve it as usual, for I am a rascal, fine on promises which I never keep." He came to the village late at night. It was so dark he could see nothing, and it was raining pitchforks. Pinocchio went straight to the fairy's house, firmly resolved to knock at the door. When he found himself there, he lost courage and ran back a few steps. A second time he came to the door, and again he ran back. The third time he repeated his performance. The fourth time, before he had time to lose his courage, he grasped the knocker and made a faint sound with it. He waited and waited and waited. Finally, after a full half-hour, a top-floor window, the house had 4 stories, opened, and Pinocchio saw a large snail look out. A tiny light glowed on top of her head. "Who knocks at this late hour?" she called. "Is the fairy home?" asked the marionette. "The fairy is asleep and does not wish to be disturbed. Who are you?" "It is I." "Who's I?" "Pinocchio." "Who is Pinocchio?" "The marionette, the one who lives in the fairy's house." "Oh, I understand," said the snail. "Wait for me there. I will come down to open the door for you." "Hurry, I beg of you, for I am dying of cold." "My boy, I am a snail, and snails are never in a hurry." An hour passed. 2 hours. The door was still closed. Pinocchio, who was trembling with fear and shivering from the cold rain on his back, knocked a second time, this time louder than before. At that second knock, a window on the 3rd floor opened, and the same snail looked out. "Dear little snail," cried Pinocchio from the street, "I have been waiting 2 hours for you, and 2 hours on a dreadful night like this are as long as 2 years. Hurry, please." "My boy," answered the snail in a calm, peaceful voice, "my dear boy, I am a snail, and snails are never in a hurry." And the window closed. A few minutes later, midnight struck. Then 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and the door still remained closed. Then Pinocchio, losing all patience, grabbed the knocker with both hands, fully determined to wake the whole house and the street with it. As soon as he touched the knocker, however, it became an eel and wiggled away into the darkness. "Really," cried Pinocchio, blind with rage, "if the knocker is gone, I can still use my feet." He stepped back and gave the door a most solemn kick. He kicked so hard that his foot went straight through the door, and his leg followed almost to the knee. No matter how he pulled and tugged, he could not pull it out. There he stayed, as if nailed to the door. Poor Pinocchio! The rest of the night he had to spend with 1 foot through the door and the other one in the air. As dawn was breaking, the door finally opened. That brave little animal, the snail, had taken exactly 9 hours to go from the 4th floor to the street. How she must have raced! "What are you doing with your foot through the door?" she asked the marionette, laughing. "It was a misfortune. Won't you try, pretty little snail, to free me from this terrible torture?" "My boy, we need a carpenter here, and I have never been one." "Ask the fairy to help me." The fairy is asleep and does not want to be disturbed. But what do you want me to do, nailed to the door like this? Enjoy yourself, counting the ants which are passing by. Bring me something to eat, at least, for I am faint with hunger. Immediately. In fact, after 3.5 hours, Pinocchio saw her return with a silver tray on her head. On the tray there were bread, roast chicken, fruit. Here is the breakfast the fairy sends to you, said the snail. At the sight of all these good things, the marionette felt much better. What was his disgust, however, when on tasting the food he found the bread to be made of chalk, the chicken of cardboard, and the brilliant fruit of colored alabaster. He wanted to cry. He wanted to give himself up to despair. He wanted to throw away the tray and all that was on it. Instead, either from pain or weakness, he fell to the floor in a dead faint. When he regained his senses, he found himself stretched out on a sofa, and the fairy was seated near him. "This time I forgive you," said the fairy to him, "but be careful not to get into mischief again." Pinocchio promised to study and to behave himself, and he kept his word for the remainder of the year. At the end of it, he passed first in all his examinations, and his report was so good that the fairy said to him happily, "Tomorrow your wish will come true." "And what is that?" "Tomorrow you will cease to be a marionette and will become a real boy." Pinocchio was beside himself with joy. All his friends and schoolmates must be invited to celebrate the great event. The fairy promised to prepare 200 cups of coffee and milk and 400 slices of toast buttered on both sides. The day promised to be a very gay and happy one. But, unluckily, in a marionette's life, there's always a but, which is apt to spoil everything. End of chapter 29.